Just so that we're on the same page, since you raised your concerns about the description, I'll read what I wrote, and then you can let us know what you had concerns about, or if you think anything that I wrote is inaccurate or not true. I want to give you uninterrupted time so you can respond. But this is the description that I wrote for the program. Debbie Irving visits the context of white supremacy. Irving is a white woman, suspected race soldier, an author, and an alleged racial justice educator and writer who teaches at Wheelock College. We'll examine her 2014 text, Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race. Irving's intended audience is white folks. Presumably, they are to study this book and gradually cease the practice of terrorizing black people. Irving declares that there are many whites who no longer want a system of white supremacy. We're anxious for evidence of these pale promoters of justice. Irving also submits Quentin Tarantino's 2012 offering, Django Unchained, as an accurate representation of the authentic experiences of black people. A core aspect of her thesis is that whites are unaware, ignorant, unconscious lemmings benefiting from and blindly adhering to structural racism. This is a nauseating and dangerous publication, again perpetuating the insidious lie that whites are ignorant about racism. That's the description. You can read it on Facebook or TalkShoe or wherever. If you're listening to the archives, that's the way it'll be written on iTunes as well. Is anything inaccurate or not true in that statement, and or is any other concerns that you had about what's in the description?
Well, I when you describe the thesis, I would say that is true. You know, I am making, and I'm not talking about white, I'm really trying to describe my experience, and I would say that I am coming from a lifetime of ignorance and being a lemming, and all the other language you had in there. The word that struck me, which is something I haven't seen in any of the reviews or heard from any people, and I'm hoping to learn more from you about, is the word dangerous. What is it that you find dangerous about my thesis or my book?
Okay, I will answer your question. I just want to make sure there's nothing inaccurate or dishonest in the description.
Well, I think there's some out of context. For instance, the part about Django, there's one line in the opening of my press release that says, after a year of films, such as Django and 12 Years a Slave and The Butler, that shed light on the black experience, Irving sheds light on the white experience. And that's all I've ever said about Django. I didn't write a blog about it. Django's not in my book. I don't think Quentin Tarantino. That's obviously it's a caricature of a film. It's exaggerated. So that felt out of context to me. But I think maybe our big difference is, it sounds to me like for you, it can't be possible that white people are ignorant. That they do know that racism exists, and there's a willful denial or ignorance in order to not have to acknowledge power and privilege. Is that getting close to how your take on the white role in racism?
No. I will give that sentence that you wrote. It's the very first sentence. If you go to her blog or her website, DebbieIrving.com, if you read her press release, the very first sentence from February of this year is, recent films such as Django Unchained, The Butler, and 12 Years a Slave have made real the lived experience of black Americans. That's what you said. And my sentence is, Irving also submits Quentin Tarantino's 2012 offering, Django Unchained, as an accurate representation of the authentic experiences of black people. So, in my view, that is not out of context. That is what you said, and it's the top sentence on your press release on your website.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see how you made that jump. But to me, it is a jump. That isn't. When I use the word real, I wouldn't have said all the words that you said with it.
Okay.
But I'm much more interested in hearing. I think for me, the thing that really stood out, and if you are coming from this place, you wouldn't be the first person of color I've heard say it. And what I have heard people say is, I think white people know exactly what's going on. They just don't want to admit it. They don't want to have to give up power and privilege. And I have heard that, and that was where I figured you were coming from when I read it.
Okay. I don't know if you got to hear the introduction, but we normally do not have an introduction that long. It was about 10 minutes, the piece from Michelle Martin's Tell Me More, where she was talking with Catherine Russell Brown, Black professor, author, about these racial hoaxes. You grew up close to the Boston area. Charles Stewart, white man, who killed his pregnant wife and blamed it on a black person, and the Boston Police Department savagely went after black people, they have video of them kicking in black people's houses and going after tons of black people, and then it comes out later that he lied and made this up and ultimately committed suicide. I think she mentioned Susan Smith, Bonnie Sweden, which is a more recent one. I listed at the beginning of the broadcast. There are even more recent examples of this from this year. If white people are ignorant about racism, how would it be possible for there to be this many illustrations of white people having these quote-unquote racial hoaxes where they blame something on a black person, where they lie and blame something on a black person, and it is frequently successful, at least for a little while, where people go along with this until, wait a minute, there's enough evidence that this person is really making this up. How would that be possible if white people are ignorant about racism?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely agree with you that all the white people you just mentioned, they knew exactly what they were doing. And that was part of their canny plan, was to point the finger at somebody who they understood would be easily, cases put up on television. The general public would agree, would have no problem. There wouldn't be any protests. But just as not all black people are the same, not all white people are the same. And I don't put myself in that category. A, I would never do anything so horrendous. And I was about to say, and B, I wouldn't jump to conclusions, but I think that would not be right. Once upon a time, I really did, if you showed me data about, for instance, arrest rates or incarceration rates, I would have interpreted that data when I saw that, black men were incarcerated and arrested at a much higher rate than white men, for instance. I would have interpreted that data as it had something to do with the fault of the black man. But there actually was more violence, there was more theft, they were more deserving of going to jail, so I'll blame the victim. I had no framework of how white supremacy worked, or what my role might be in it, including my role to have ingested all this bias as a white person. And so I think there's a big difference between, somebody who would create a setup like Charles Stewart did, and somebody who's going along and just watching the news and ingesting all this bias, but not necessarily acting on it in a violent way. So I put myself in that latter group. Does that make sense to you?
No, but I understand. I understand the logic of it. I hear that pretty regularly. In my opinion, the question that I've asked regularly on the program when I talk to white people, do racist white supremacists, do they assume that if you're white, you're racist? Every single white person I have ever asked on the air or private conversations wherever has said yes, and generally immediately. This is one of the few times where it does not take them a lot of time, a lot of hemming and hawing. We don't have any pussyfooting. They pretty immediately give an affirmative. Yes, racist white supremacists, they assume if you're white, you're racist. That being the case, see, that's what I mean. And for me to have unanimous agreement on that reveals a lot about what it means to be a white person. And that, for me, is compounded with situations like Bonnie Sweden and Charles Stewart and Susan Smith and the white girl at LSU who said that a van of black people kidnapped and abducted her, and they found out it wasn't true. For these sort of things, and I'm sure there are tons more of these that we don't even know about, where they were successful and a black person just got fired or thrown in jail or whatever the case may be, and it never even came out that, this was all based on a lie and white people's dedication to racism. But that, for me, really gets to the core of why I think your work, and it's not just you, this is very common, where white people submit that the reason we have a system of white supremacy in place is because white people are ignorant. And in my view, nothing could be further from the truth. You cannot be white and be ignorant about racism. If you are white, there are expectations that go along with that about what you are supposed to do, what you are not supposed to do as a white person in a system of white supremacy. And if you violate those do's and don'ts, other white people will let you know immediately, generally speaking, and there can be consequences if you do not adjust your behavior. Either that's true or it's not. Are you saying that's not true?
No, I think I'm getting much closer to understanding what you're saying. And no, I do. There's absolutely a social code. I think if any of us step out of our social code, we get smacked around by the people who are invested in us staying in our role. You look at the black high school kid.
Hang on. Let's stay focused on white people. That's one of the things. If you're accepting feedback, I don't want to do a lot of interrupting, but that's something we were talking about. White people having to stick to the racist code. I don't want to hear about black people having to adjust to social norms. I want you to respond specifically to white people having to abide by a racist code, or other white people will let them know they are committing an error.
I think that's absolutely true, and I don't think that white people often know that it's part of a system or a structure. In my experience, and with most of the people I work with, I partner with Eddie Moore. We have a workshop called I Am George Zimmerman, Exploring White Supremacy and Systems of Oppression. The people we work with there are dumbfounded when they understand that the social code that they have felt themselves boxed in by, which is what you're describing, is connected to a larger structure. This is a structure that was put in place in the late 1600s when the word white got inserted into our law. And for people who are living 400 years later, for me, I had no idea. I honestly didn't know I had a racial identity. I really thought that race was something that belonged to black and brown people. I had a 180-degree distorted view of what racism was. So if I felt social pressure to step back into my little white box, I would have seen it as a class box or a manners box, but I never would have thought that it was a white, that I was holding in place this, exquisitely, that you couldn't design a better system of oppression, I don't think, than one that marks people physically in a way you can't change. I had no idea that system existed. I really didn't.
That is, it is just not believable. And as I said, that is dangerous, and it's not just you. It's many white people. The example that I reference pretty regularly, everyone, or I won't say everyone, but James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns, is very popular. People cite it on a regular basis to talk about how this system was in place. So I can't even say some years ago, the white woman that's coming on the program tomorrow, she said she interviewed a black male in Alabama in the 2000s where these signs are still up in some towns in Alabama. So ongoing. But people referencing that book, there's no way in the world any white person could look me in the face and tell me that this is the result of ignorance when you've got signs up saying, "Nigger, do not let the sun go down on you in this particular town." Who put the sign up? Are you saying that white people are illiterate? They can't read the sign? When you got signs on the water fountains not that long ago, in many of our lifetimes, people that are listening, well, not me, but many of the people that listen to this program, even in their lifetime, are you saying white people can't read the sign? They don't know what that sign means? When white people are talking about, we're not going to sell any property to black people, they don't know what they're doing? That is foolishness of the highest order. And that's not just here. That is worldwide where you had that in place. It is a very recent thing for racism to be much more covert, where you don't have just blatant signs plastered everywhere and nigger jokes being a regular occurrence. That is a very recent thing. I say all the time, it would be absurd for you to try to assert this argument, and many of the other white people, because it's not just you, I hear this all the time. It would be absurd to try to assert this argument that this is the result of white ignorance just 50 years ago. I don't even think a white person could make that sort of statement with a straight face in 1960. And I'm submitting that not that much has changed. It has just gotten more covert. And in fact, I think this is the way that currently white people try to present the problem of racism, white supremacy, that they're just ignorant. I didn't know I was not supposed to say that. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that.